Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Nerdcast.
It's not fair.
We got a special treat for you this month.
Come on, I'm the only one who doesn't get to go to the moon.
It's called Retro Month. And while he's over here complaining, I'm going to give you a history on video game news.
I'm gonna review classic and the horror movie and horror video game genre. I should go to the moon! Duh!
Nerdcast!
To the Batmobile. Let's go. Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed. Roger. Ready to move out.
It's time for news and views, but since this is Retro Month, there's no new news for you. Instead, we have video game history.
And retro reviews. Go!
Video games have a long history. There are more than 70 different game consoles in existence. With all the new console releases, I'm here to bring you up to speed with all the things you might have missed. In 1967, Ralph H. Baer created the Brown Box, the first ever gaming console. Air quotes. There was a grand total of 6 games from the system, and it even supported 2 players. The very first video game was called Tennis for Two. Magnavox decided to license his idea, read technology, and created the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972. What you might find interesting is that the games did not have sound.
Silent video game. I hope they came packaged with my own piano player.
A few years later, they released the Magnavox Odyssey 100 and 200, but there wasn't much of a difference between the two consoles.
Fact time. In England, their equivalent of Halloween, Guy Fawkes Day, is celebrated on November 5th. That's close enough to Halloween that I'm still going to talk about it. Now here's one of the scariest movies of all time. It is a classic from a classic of filmmakers, Mr. Stanley Kubrick.
Kubrick?
I'm not sure. But it's not his name that matters. It's his legacy. The Big K has pumped out timeless classic films, from 2001: A Space Odyssey to A Clockwork Orange, to that masterwork of horror itself, based on the book from Stephen King, a movie that terrifies people even to this day, The Shining. This movie is based around an alcoholic writer, played by, let's call him Old Joker, who takes a job as a caretaker during the off-season at a hotel. He brings along his family, including his wife, Shelley Duvall, and his son, who never really acted again. Danny is a psychic, because this is a Stephen King novel after all, and immediately he starts having premonitions about the ghosts in the evil hotel until, as it is wont to do, everything goes really crazy.
And classy.
Right. The Shining is one of King's most well-known novels. As such, it fully embraced the idea that the supernatural was not only real, but prevalently existed under a thin veil. As such, there's no question that the hotel is haunted. The ghosts are out in numbers. They flash all around the little world of the Overlook Hotel, being generally creepy and freaking people out, especially when they do this. Or this.
Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Danny. Forever and ever and ever.
And the best part is, so what? The ghosts are creepy, but the real genius comes from the fact that they might not have any hold on reality at all. Being creepy doesn't make you evil.
Yes, it does.
And the movie never explicitly shows anyone being possessed. So who knows why Jack Nicholson's going crazy?
Because he's Jack Nicholson.
Could be that it's just his alcoholism exploding into thunderous violence. Could be that he's full-on possessed. Ambiguity is this movie's greatest weapon. The presence of ghosts is explained, but not who they are or why they are where they are. The audience may be coming into the story of a family with an alcoholic father, but everyone is late to the story of the undead, and that makes them that much more terrifying. Of course, it's not all about the writing. Nicholson and Duvall give phenomenal performances and play off of each other very well to create the impression of victim and abuser. Little Danny also, well, he's a child actor, but luckily most of his performance involves being frightened and talking like a smoker.
Red Rum.
So, even though I'm a year early, here's an excellent movie to get you started on your Halloween jitters if you haven't seen it already. The Shining is an excellent slow burn to get the right mindset for the Halloween season that I desperately miss so very, very much.
Around this time is when Atari decided that they wanted to compete not just in arcades, but in the home market as well. Atari was founded in 1972, but Pong wasn't actually released until 1975. Gunfight, the first computer game, was released in 1975 as well. The Atari 2600, what most people think of when they picture that old Atari that's somewhere in their basement, was released in 1977. Several other companies have also made their own systems because no one had quite yet distinguished between publisher and developer. And you thought your entertainment center looked bad now. Think about all the consoles you would have had back then.
What did they do with all the wires?
For more perspective, in 1980, the world saw the first 3D game. No, not 3DS 3D, just not two-dimensional. Dragon's Lair, the first Laserdisc game, was released in 1983, same as the Commodore 64. In the late 80s, Nintendo and Sega began to enter the market. Atari released the 7800 in 1986, and their color handheld, the Atari Lynx, in 1989. Famous games from way back when are Space Invaders, Pong, Pac-Man, and Frogger. I'm pretty sure I still have those somewhere.
With Halloween still in my mind, it's important that we take the time to remember all the great games that have horrified us over the years and that we didn't have time to review last month. Resident Evil 4 is an undeniable classic. It's not only the strongest of the Resident Evil franchise, but also a revered classic in horror games in general. After RE4, the horror game changed. This is due largely to the experimental over-the-shoulder camera style that made players feel present in the action, like a cameraman who was forced to record everything that was going on. Studios started copying this, especially the Dead Space games, which were able to use the camera style to achieve massive success and popularity. Some say undeservingly, copycats. Another factor working in RE4's favor was a simple matter of timing. 4 hit the series as it was transitioning from horror survival style to zombie-infected action style. This meant 4 could have some of the best of both worlds. You see, zombies were old hat even way back in 2005, and players weren't really frightened by the undead as long as their guns were loaded. Capcom was aware of this during the design phase, so they altered the style of the game as it progressed. Clever players might notice, for example, that the early chapters of the game are based on survival, giving players limited ammo and weak guns. As the game progresses, so too does Leon's arsenal, until it's obvious that he's become a one-man army. By the end of the game, a standard zombie is just a waste of ammo. In order to accommodate Leon's firepower, the last half of the game begins loosening the horror aspect and unleashing the crazy by introducing, among other things, zombies with guns and near-invulnerable monsters. In order to explain the real genius behind the design choice, I have to explain a bit about the horror genre in general. You see, a good horror game isn't about being scary in and of itself. Humans generally don't like being terrified. It makes many of us uncomfortable. The real trick to a horror game is actually the surmounting of impossible odds. In a well-designed title, the situation seems desperate. The player must always be on the verge of death based on split-second decisions. The feeling is, of course, an illusion, because each situation is designed so that the player can succeed and finish the game. But the illusion is absolutely vital, because when the player succeeds, survives, and continues on, that's the real adrenaline rush. The contrast between death and success needs to be sheer for it to be significant. So when Resident Evil 4 cranks up the crazy factor, it accomplishes 2 things. First, it maintains the tension horror games require, and second, it allows the player to utilize their progress in order to feel like they're gaining a sense of control over a hostile and impossible environment. Basically, the entire last half of the game is a 4-hour fanfare to the player. It's an ode to his accomplishments. It's a victory lap. I mean, once you have access to a rocket launcher, you really shouldn't be afraid of anything. So, does RE4 have its flaws? Sure, it's kind of campy, especially dialogue like this.
Why am I the one who always gets the short end of the stick?
You, who are you really? Come on and tell us. You are a long way from home, cowboy. You have my sympathies.
Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice. Anyway, you know what this is all about. My assignment is to search for the president's missing daughter.
What? All by yourself?
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire. Then again, maybe you did.
Oh, you crazy American. It's a direct order from the chief himself. I tell you, it's no picnic.
I'm counting on you guys.
And the controls still have a hint of that classic Resident Evil robot walking that prevents Leon from moving while turning or aiming his weapon. But these are all minor flaws compared to the game's astounding payoff. If you want to play the game today, it's easy to find. It's been remade multiple times with the most up-to-date version now available on the PlayStation Store in high definition. Even in HD, the graphics, okay, they take some adjustment, but it's more than playable. So go grab it cheap, turn out the lights, and have 1 week before my next review. Go.
And for your fun, random fact of the day, did you know that Activision was the first third-party developer? Yep, in 1980, some companies finally got themselves together and started to figure out how to make games instead of consoles. Mitch is so mad that he didn't get a chance to go to the moon that he's not talking to me right now.
Give me glue!
I'm pretty sure he's building a rocket.
And a ball-peen hammer!
Anyways, in the meantime, you can enjoy Comic Crash with Jeremy reporting live from the moon.
And a master's degree in aeronautics!
So I followed the trail of the AI stuff to the moon. I don't know why I didn't come here in the first place, because that's where it all started anyways. I can't get new comics again because I'm in space and they don't ship them. So I'll do another retro review. I'm going to talk about 3 books that helped start the Vertigo imprint. They changed how the industry works and helped launch the careers of some superstar British writers. First up, Grant Morrison, a writer well known for elaborate mind screws, with his works generally making much more sense upon a second read-through after the conclusion. He also loves to use themes relating to the real existence of superheroes as literary immortals, or perhaps in other worlds, stuff like that. Lately, it feels gimmicky at times because he's done it so much, but in his prime, he wrote 27 issues of Animal Man, where he pulled it off first and arguably the best. The series had a lot of standalone tales that explored some metaphysical ideas, ranging from simple vegetarianism stuff to a philosophical crisis of an aging supervillain with an existential exploration of the relative immortality of Wile E. Coyote. But the grand kicker was the slow connection between the titular character and the readers, beginning mostly in the 3rd volume, when Animal Man looks right at you during a peyote trip, culminating in Morrison himself stepping into the pages of his own story to address such issues as his occasional soapboxing, Animal Man's lack of control over his own life, and the futility of real-life tragedies by comparison to extreme but reversible comic tragedies. Animal Man would probably not still be around, much less have his own series in the New 52, had it not been for this legendary run. The following runs in the same series had a lot of philosophical ideas to offer, but Morrison's will forever remain the most memorable. It's collected in 3 trades or an oversized omnibus. Second is the equally legendary Alan Moore, but surprisingly I'm not going to talk about Watchmen. Well, it shouldn't be that surprising since Watchmen's well known. I don't need to tell you about Watchmen. What I'm going to tell you about is why Swamp Thing is such a cult favorite character. Before the New 52 series, I wondered that myself. His name feels like it was lazily thrown together, and he's literally a walking mass of moss and seaweed. But Alan Moore really pushed the boundaries of comic storytelling back in the day, and transformed him from a lumbering pile of plants into the guardian of the collective consciousness of all plant life in the world. Moore's approach was the opposite of Morrison's, where his run consisted mostly of short tales that read well individually, as opposed to a tightly knit long-term narrative. This gave the series an amazing diversity of philosophical ideas to explore, from an identity crisis in his altered origin to saving the world from one of his own ilk, and even a past-death journey through other worlds. Alan Moore's The Saga of Swamp Thing remains my favorite work of his, due in part to being one of the first writers to really bond the art and dialogue together, as well as making me realize my fondness for characters who are essentially immortal, since it requires much more unique and advanced storytelling. The entire series is collected in 6 volumes. Finally, I want to talk about a much shorter but no less significant book, Neil Gaiman's Black Orchid. The series was 3 prestige format comics collected in 1 trade, and it is perhaps the most experimental of these 3 in terms of superhero storytelling. The story begins with the titular hero discovered by the villain, and subsequently she's shot through the head. A stark, practical move countering most supervillains' MOs. What follows is a beautiful, almost ephemeral journey of discovery, as 2 of Orchid's offspring/clones/something seek to discover the truth of their origins through her bleak childhood, Arkham Asylum, and the swamps of Louisiana. The presence of DC characters is limited and almost hidden, like the series exists in a ghost halfway in the DCU and halfway in its own world. The protagonists are helped by the likes of Batman and Swamp Thing and Poison Ivy, while being pursued by a vengeful Lex Luthor. The one major advantage Black Orchid has over the other 2 is an extremely unique artwork of Dave McKean, the artist of Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth. Animal Man's art is basic for the time and effective enough. Swamp Thing's is a little more experimental in layout, but pretty basic in design. Dave McKean's work is the pinnacle of surreal. It makes the reading difficult at times, but even when I had to reread scenes multiple times, it never halted my experience because of how deeply layered everything is. It's certainly a more advanced comic read, but if you've reached that level, you cannot do without Black Orchid. Well, that's it for this week's Comic Crash Retro Stuff. Bye from the moon!
This is Nerdcast. Well, since you're watching the show already, I'm going to assume that you like the show. Remember to catch us every Monday night at 9. Hope to see you next week. You okay there, buddy?
I'm gonna get through this, Jess, because even though my rocket failed me, even though the moon, once again elusive, like it was to America in 1969, and other times in history before that date when we didn't have rockets,
Where's my phone?
the moon eludes me. And in time, like you, like Jeremy, like
Can I get some water here?
eventually, I will reach you, shining sphere with a man's
Oh,
face
hey, is
in
that
it.
pizza? I want a slice.
The moon is much like pizza. It is round, it is full, and I like to picture tiny triangles being taken out of it. Because one day I will conquer the moon and mine it for all of its delicious cheese. And I will rule. I will rule the moon.